Yeah, we were talking about how the biggest myth is that one, you can be secure, cybersecurity. It's all about risk management, and two, about compliance. Like I said, HIPAA is the medical, PCI for credit cards. There's lots of government compliance that you have to meet controls. And I was talking about how controls make you feel secure, but there's a two-factor authentication control. And I could have my wife come in and go, "You're you," and I use a password. That's two factors. It's not really two factors. It's not really an extra security step. So ticking a box for an insurance company and say, yes, I meet my two-factor authentication because my wife says I'm me and then I log in, it's one thing, but security is another. So it is really about looking at your risk management and taking steps in a real way to be
Mm.
secure.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Expert. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Mike Crandall. And Mike, we're going to be talking a little bit about cyber risk management, and more particularly focused on small and mid-sized companies, and keeping that cyber risk management also affordable, so it doesn't blow budgets or go out or spiral out of control. And then also maybe discussing a little bit about how there is no such thing as a total cybersecurity, but how you can go about taking reasonable steps, and what are some of the common issues that small businesses might face, and startups with cybersecurity. And I'm sure we'll talk about a few other fun things along the way. So with that much as introduction, welcome on the podcast, Mike.
Hi, thank you, Devin. Glad to be here. Yeah, we started Digital Beachhead after working with a lot of the federal government and state and local governments to help support small and mid-sized businesses. I'm a 20-year Air Force veteran. Grew up doing cybersecurity for the Department of Defense before it was even a term. We were growing networks by connecting two computers together, and rapidly grew over the 20-year career into enterprise networks and security operations centers and the like. So we've had a wonderful ride while I was in the military. And then since I've retired, trying to take that knowledge and kind of bring it to the small to mid-sized market, which I think is underrepresented in the cybersecurity space.
Awesome. Well, definitely a great introduction. And just as a reminder for those that are listeners, Mike has been on the Inventive Journey podcast, which is a sister podcast to this one. So if you haven't had a chance, definitely encourage you to go and check out his journey there and hear how he's got to where he's at today. But diving in maybe to the topic at hand, and in no particular order, I mean, I think one of the things that are, I guess, when you're talking to a startup or a small business, especially, or something that's more just getting started or less familiar with cybersecurity, I think there's a few fears. One is that, or I guess one is a naiveness of, hey, I'm small enough, I don't need to worry about this. It's not a big issue.
No one's coming for
And
me.
hey, nobody's coming for me, and there isn't enough, I'm a small fish and they would never worry about me. Or two, it's the opposite of, hey, this is going to cost me an arm and a leg. We're just getting started. We'll worry about this when we're bigger. And so help us, kind of understand on both fronts, maybe taking it one at a time. But for the first one, if you're a startup or a small business and you're just getting going and you don't have a lot of customers or clients or revenue, or, you're just been out for a year or two and you're saying, we don't hardly have a presence, most of it's word of mouth, or we just those type of things, should they, probably a biased question, but should they think about cybersecurity, or why should they, if they should?
Yeah, I think you should bake it in from the get-go because it'll be easier if you start baking it in up front than if you try to bolt it on later. And I like to say there is a myth of cybersecurity in that you think you can be secure. Well, the US government sends hundreds of millions of dollars on cybersecurity, and they are penetrated, hacked, breached, all the time. We read about it in the news, all the big companies. I reckon it to Ocean's 11 movies, where you hear the big heist, you see it in the news, but to get that heist, there was such intricate detail, and everything had to go right. And, the payoff is big. But at the same time, how many convenience stores are robbed during that whole period of planning and implementation of that big heist. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, all taking little chunks as you go. Well, that's your small businesses in the cyber world. They're not going to
Mm.
get 4.4 million from you as a new startup, but can they get 4K to, keep you in operation? So we have to constantly kind of be baking in that idea of cybersecurity. And I focus it on cyber risk management, meaning what is your risk? What is your potential income? What kind of revenue do you have coming in? And balancing that to take some steps versus no steps to provide some security, because your data is valuable.
Mm. Now let me ask kind of one, and I think that's a great introduction. I'll still push back a little. I don't know, pushback. Pushback sounds like I disagree, which I don't. One of the things that I think that comes up is, okay, all of that said, you know, let's say you have millions of businesses out there, probably online. I'm guessing millions. I have no idea what the number is, but I'm going with millions because it sounds good. But you
Right.
have, millions of businesses out there. A lot of them are online, and I'll even take I'll take the harder example. I'm not online. In other words, I'm a small mom and pop shop. Maybe I'm a, service-based industry. I'm a mechanic, or I change oil, or I have a small store. And so I'm saying there's really not a lot that they can come after me with. In those circumstances where you're more disconnected or have a very minimal presence, should you still be thinking about cybersecurity, or should it be more of, hey, we're more of an online business, we have more customer data, we use a CRM, customer relationship management system? Kind of what kind of business should be thinking about it, and when should you be thinking about it?
Well, and that's a great question, because it does boil down to that cyber risk management part. And cyber risk management doesn't say all or nothing. It's what can we afford? What steps can we take? Are there free things you can do? So even in that small mom and pop or garage, if you have any connectivity, so the only way you would have no connectivity is you're a mechanic and everything's on paper. You have no computers, you don't take credit cards, you're just cash only, I fix your car, you leave. But
Mm,
if you have any sort of connectivity, be it a phone where you're keeping your customer records, um, you have to think cybersecurity, but it can be as simple as I need to make sure I have strong passwords. I can try to set up some sort of two-factor authentication into my files. Is my phone encrypted if someone steals it? Like iPhones typically just are that way, right? If you can't log in 3 times, it trashes your phone. So you are thinking cybersecurity, probably not even realizing you're thinking cybersecurity just by implementing a password on something.
mm.
As someone comes into your shop, small mom and pop coffee shop, and you have Wi-Fi, is that the same Wi-Fi you're using to do the business, or do you have the customer Wi-Fi and your Wi-Fi? You thought cybersecurity because you have two. So there are steps, and you are thinking of it, but it's really formalizing that instead of just, well, I don't know, or I'm not really. Put it
Mm.
into your concept of business. So that way, when you become a retail chain of mom and pop coffee shops, you've already been thinking cybersecurity, and it's not just something now that you're like, oh, I've gotten big and I need to figure this out. You've kind of been doing it along the way.
Interesting. No, I think that's a great idea, and I think that one of my takeaways, and maybe it's wrong, but I'll take away anyway, is that the things that you should be considering is there are probably different levels of cybersecurity. Meaning, if you are that all you're doing, and all is in quotes, is you're taking customer payment information, you're not doing a lot of online presence, then you're going to think about your levels of cybersecurity is probably different than if you're heavily online, dealing with a lot of confidential information, using a lot of different databases, having multiple employees, a lot of people access. And it seems like there's kind of a sliding scale, so to speak, depending
Right.
on your level of risk and your level of exposure. Then you're probably going to be thinking different thing or ways that you need to mitigate it.
And it, again, I refer it back to our homes. So do you leave your front door open or do you shut it? My parents live out in the country. The door is shut, but it's open. They've never locked their door in their entire lives. Me living in a more suburban area, I'm going to lock that door. I have a little bit more risk than my
Hmm.
parents have. So it's the same idea, right? Risk and your risk management. What steps are you going to take?
No, and that I agree with you, and I have to smile at the leaving your door open because that's what my wife does, and it drives me. I know we're pretty out in the nowhere. I don't know, out nowhere. We're not that far from the city, but we live in a pretty rural area. It's farming country, and even beyond that, we're in a single lane road that's only a few houses at the end, and so the number of traffic and the people, it'd have to be one of our neighbors. They'd have so it's unlikely they're going to break in. And I still want my door locked because I don't like people to be able to come in and out of my house. Yet my wife leaves it open all the time. So
Well, that's your risk aversion. You're more risk averse than she is. And a
that's
business
true.
has to make that same decision. A mom and pop doesn't need a $10,000 firewall. Maybe they don't
Yep.
need one at all. But if you're more risk averse, you can say, hey, I think I'm going to throw one in, get a little small one,
No,
It's
I think that that's definitely a great point. Now, one of the other things, and you started to hit on it kind of with the $10,000 firewall, is if I am a small business now, and we have I think I'd say a decent cybersecurity presence. Now, I think that I'm sure there are ways it could be bolstered. And again, it's always the offset of costs and risks and rewards. But if you're to look at it and say, hey, I just don't have the budget, or I'm worried I don't have the budget. I don't know how much it's going to cost, but like everything else, every time I ask somebody what's going to cost, it's always a whole bunch of money that I don't have, especially as a startup. How do you go about kind of balancing the cost or what you should be considering, or where do you get started, and how do you overcome that fear that I can't break the bank, therefore I'm just going to ignore it and pretend it's not an issue?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, we have to remove our heads from the sand. So not doing anything, just taking no action is really putting yourself in a liability state. If you can take some action based on the size and scope of your business, again, to where if you can show, hey, we change our passwords every 90 days. We we're not big enough to have a firewall, but I'm using my ISP, my internet service provider's service, and they provide some security. So I'm monitoring kind of that router or I use Xfinity. They have an application that you can see who's trying to get into your network, who's on your network. So I'm doing that. I'm using that free tool that comes with my service provider. And
Mm-hmm.
then as you grow and you get more, then maybe you do put in a firewall. Well, firewalls range from something you can get at Blockbuster or Best Buy versus a $10,000 multifunction enterprise level firewall. Well, where are you? What do you have? If you are dealing in small bits of data, then get something small, a couple $100. Protect your products that way. Um, if you get to a size to where your IT is beyond you, a lot of people it's spin the hat. I'm now CEO. Nope, now I'm the IT director. Hire a managed service provider. There are organizations that for $50 a month will provide you your email, web, you know, so many phone calls a month to support you in building your network up. You don't need to go in and say, hey, I've hired Jim, the IT guy, and it's costing me that much to afford him, and he's telling me I need all this other kind of stuff. I
No,
look at it as a crawl, walk, run.
no, and I think that's a great way to approach it. So now I just because of some of what we said, and it's not something we talked about before, so I've told you a bit of a curveball, but I'm a avid reader, and I put reader in quotes because almost everything I read is an audiobook. So I do it when I'm running. I usually run about anywhere from 7 to 9 miles in the morning. I usually drive into work, go home from work, and I'm always most of the time I'm either one listening to a podcast or two listening to an audiobook. And one of the audiobooks I've actually are unrelated to this but caught my attention was Ghost in the Wires. Have you ever read that or heard that book?
I have a
All right, and I'll see just because I'm more curious. It may be completely just a fun book. It's with Kevin Mitnick. Have you heard of Kevin Mitnick?
Kevin Mitnick was one of the original hackers.
All right, so at least you had that. So it's a book basically. I think it's written by him, or at least it's an autobiography or biography about Kevin
Mhm.
Mitnick, basically from how he got started. And one of the things I found interesting, and just kind of what you hit on that I was just curious, is he does a lot more of social engineering, right? So you do a whole bunch of homework, you find out the people's names, the company's names, you call in, you give them a good story, you find the person that's the weakest link in the company, and you're going to tell them why you need this information. Hey, let me work on it reset the password with you while you're on the phone. Give me your password. All this, what they call social engineering. And so when you're looking at, and I'm just curious on, or maybe a bit of your take, also just because I happen to find the book to be interesting, when you're looking at all of the cyber hacking, should you be more worried about, the phishing scams and people trying to email you, or is it the more of the social engineering and they call up and try and, get you to give the information over the phone? Is it all of the above? And I know that you could do all of it and you'd be the most secure, but when you're looking at trying to get started, what is kind of the things that you should be most worried about, or that you should focus on first?
Well, I think those in the cybersecurity industry always agree on one thing. The number one risk to any network are the users. And we don't mean that users are malicious, and you have to account for that. You always have the disgruntled worker that's going to take down the ship, but most of the time it's that what Kevin Mitnick learned was using human nature against itself. So you love puppies, I send you an email with like free puppies, or save this poor puppy, and you click on it because you want to learn more. I'm in your network. I call up the help desk, and I teach at university at night, and one of the videos I show them that's on YouTube now is a video of a lady doing something called vishing, which is voice phishing, so calling up, kind of what the old Kevin Mitnick style. And they call your cell phone provider, and she puts on a crying baby on her laptop. And she just talks like, oh, my husband and I remarried, just got a baby, blah, 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 sad story, sad story. Please help me. And the person on the other line is, let me see what I can do. She talks her way into your phone account. So
now it seems like, but that one's also, it seems like it's the hardest one, because in one of the things I always, and this is just a topic I find interesting, so I'm going off on a whole bunch of tangents, but one of the things I found interesting is that, first of all, a lot of times when I've read about it, and I just kind of find it interesting, hence why I'm listening to a book, is, they'll try and catch you at vulnerable times. So maybe the normal person's out of the office and you have a person that's temporary covering their desk, or they'll call you right as you're getting into the office or wrapping up, or they'll try and go through and see who is the weakest link, or the person that's the newer hire, the least trained. And so if that's the case, and they're looking for playing to your weaknesses and trying to social engineer to get in, how do you go about doing that as a company? Because it's easier to just, hey, we'll have a policy, change our passwords every 30 days. It's much harder if they're working with, or if they're going after individuals. How do you do that as a business, or how do you protect against that?
I have a meme that shows all the technology in one corner, firewalls, intrusion protection systems, and it's a boxing ring that's in one corner, and the other corner is Dave, and Dave is clicking on the mouse, letting everybody in. And the only way to protect against that is education. And most people do. I have my employee handbook. There's a paragraph that says, don't do bad things in cyber and don't go to bad stuff.
Don't click on any links that you don't know where they go to, which or half the people is still ignoring them, like, but yeah.
Exactly. Or they do the one thing once a year. Okay, we're having a company meeting, or we're going to send out a mass email. Read this PowerPoint. It tells you not to do it. It's 15 minutes read through. People click through it at 90 miles an hour. Say, I completed my training. What we try to provide is monthly recurring training that's different, is game-based, interactive, has video, so it's a little different, along with simulated phishing attempts. So we go out to a company and say, here, your employees are being trained every month with something new. Also, every couple of weeks, they might get this phishing email. If they click on it, hopefully it's the one we sent, it's our fake attempt. And that redirects them right to training. Like, hey, you weren't kind of getting it, let's re-up you on what to be aware of. So that's really the only thing you can do is plug away. But I can tell you, we do that with companies, and most companies still have like a 5 to 8% click-through rate on after all the training. So
no, and it's hard. I'll give I think that's, I think that training is probably the best. And I think my view, and this one we'll talk about in a minute, is you're never going to be 100 or totally secure, which is kind of what we talked about a bit more. You can be as secure as reasonably possible, but you have 100. First of all, I don't think, because hackers are always figuring out new ways to do it, how to get in, how to do new different approaches. So even if you completely implemented everything as of today that you're aware of, tomorrow's going to change and there's going to be a new thing, or Windows will have a security patch that they do, or somebody will come along with a new way to social engineer anything else. But one of the things that I found interesting and or that I always do is I don't know if you've ever probably got them. You get the phishing schemes, which is you usually get them, and I read about it, and the reason they do it is they'll do it late at night or early in the morning, and they'll say, "Hey, this is your boss. I'm in a meeting and I need you to go out and get some Amazon cards or Apple cards or whatever in order for you to, for me to give to the people at the meeting as a thank you or something of that nature." And then, most people will just ignore it, or they'll call their boss and do it. But they say, "Hey, in a meeting, I can't talk with you," and you'll get a percentage to go out and do that. Well, what I started doing is I usually will just go online and find a picture of a card that's already been scratched off on the back, and then I'll just send it to them. And then they always get mad at me because it never actually works and it's already been used. So that's always my small revenge against people that are trying to annoy me and bug me if I happen to have the time. But with that, if you're taking in the position that, okay, I can't 100% secure it, I can't do everything that's out there and possible. I'll throw even a harder question. I don't have the budget to go hire a cybersecurity consultant, or I don't have that right now. I only have $10,000 to get my startup up and going. What are the common things that people should start going or doing in order to make sure that they are secure as they can, as they grow?
Exactly. And I love to offer these like tips and tricks for small businesses. Number one would be to pay for a password manager. There's plenty of them out there. LastPass is one. That's one I recommend, but there are many out there. You just want to make sure encrypted. And you can either use cloud-based or locally based. They're very inexpensive. $100 will get you a year subscription. And basically that will create a single location. So you only have to remember one password, and you can use strong passwords across all your connections. So that would be number one, is manage your passwords so that you have unique passwords to every website you visit, but you still only need to remember one.
And that's what I was going to say. And that was going to be my question, because, I have probably quite literally 200 or 300 passwords, probably for all the softwares, all the things we access, all the databases. I don't know. I may be making up, but we have a lot of passwords, and honestly can't remember all of them. And so there's usually a couple options. Some people will keep an Excel spreadsheet on their computer, which I think is bad.
Yep.
Maybe it's good, but I think that's probably an easy way to find. And half the time they'll label it passwords, which is even worse. But or you'll be like my wife, and she'll write it down on a piece of paper, keep it in a notepad in our house, and at least it's in our house, and so it's kind of secure, and I'm not unless somebody breaks in and happens to get it. But or you have some of those apps like on your phone that are hey, we're a repository for all of your passwords. You have one password to log in. We have a good cybersecurity. We secure it, and then you can get it. Is that last one? Is that a good option to keep track of all your passwords?
That's what we use, the password manager. I wouldn't use your Chrome or the default, because if they can break into your machine, they're you, and therefore they have all your passwords to all things. So just storing it in your Chrome isn't a password manager, but paying for a secure password manager, like you say, an app or web service that usually plugs in. Like LastPass will plug into my Chrome, it plugs into Firefox. So that way I just log in with my master password that I write down and put in a safe in case, I get hit by a bus. My wife will be able to at least collect everything and know where everything is at. But and then that goes across all platforms. So if I come into your office and I log onto your computer, I can still access all of my passwords from wherever I am. So it's a useful tool. And then the passwords can be truly unique, because how many of us use something with additional twist or turn on it just so we kind of know our password is, abracadabra, and this A is capitalized in one and this A is capitalized in another one, or I put an @ symbol in one, but it's still abracadabra across all my passwords, right?
Right. Or you'll put the numbers 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 1, 5, or 3, 5, 7, or some variation,
Right,
and
you
you'll
put
have
some
all of those. Yep.
I can tell you that's the first thing we do with a password breaking tool is put in words with numbers. Usually 3. Most people don't go more than 3 numbers. So
interesting.
that'll be our first run through.
I had to laugh just as a complete aside. One of the ones that I used to use, and I've since years ago, but I used for a lot of things. And then I had, was One Monkeys. Now I don't use it anymore. There's
Mhm.
probably something out there that I never use, and I don't have access to, and it doesn't have anything. Maybe, and I'm probably giving away my password now on the podcast, and that's
An
you're
old
gonna
bank
tell me that's
account.
horrible. It's probably all. I haven't used it in 10 years, so I'm fairly safe, I think. But I had to laugh because I Googled it online one time as the common passwords, and like one of those was like, it was up there. It was like on the top 10, was like that was one of the passwords that everybody used. I'm like, dang it, I thought it was the good one. Um, but now
Yeah, it
I'll
came in
ask
right after password.
exactly. Password is even the worst, or 1 2 3 4, or some variation of that. Now I'll ask one, and I said we could talk forever, and we're already getting close to the end of the podcast. But one of the other questions that I'm sure comes up with people is, okay, no matter how vigilant you are, you have different passwords, you implement, even if it's a rudimentary, maybe a VN or VN, if I can see it, or yeah, a VMS, or VPS. Sorry, there we go. If I can get it out, VPS, it gives you a more anonymized presence. You are periodically doing the trainings. You do all the things that you can with the budget you have. Maybe you do a consultant, or you have someone on staff if you can afford it. All of those things in place as best as you can with your budget, and you still get compromised at what point, or at one point someone gets into your system and either tries to leverage you. They give the ransomware or something else. What do you do once you get compromised, in that, or when that happens?
The two biggest pieces of advice is one, plan ahead. Don't wait till you're compromised. Kind of come up with what will we do? How will we respond? Who's responsible? Who do we call? Do we have someone that we need to call? What is the local police department's standpoint? And you don't call 911, but I'm sure they have a department that you can lodge a formal police report, or do you contact the FBI, depending on what data is lost? Do you have to contact your state attorney general? Some states have privacy laws that if more than 500 records are stolen, you have to, by law, contact them. So understand your laws and come up with a
Mm.
little emergency response plan. Again, that size and scope will be based on what you have. Mom and pops are not going to come up with, hey, I got to call the CIA and then the FBI and, call on people to come from the rafters. But they should know, hey, we need to unplug it from the wall and then follow my next step, which is have backups,
Mm.
backups, because everyone may be breached, right? We have to expect it's going to happen. And I say backups in the power of three. If you have a laptop, it's okay to back it up to the laptop somewhere, just so if you destroy a file or you need something quickly, bam, it's right there. And you can do that rapidly. Like that could be an ongoing, constant backup.
Mm.
Back up to the cloud. So that way, if you have OneDrive or Google Drive or something, back it up to that cloud. But know that if you are ransomware, the first thing they're going to do is use that connection you have to your cloud and encrypt that too. So lastly, it's like $80 at Costco. It's a 5 terabyte drive that is USB that you can plug in once a day, once a week, depending on how much data you collect. Back it up, put it away. If they can ransomware that's sitting on your shelf, unconnected to the internet or your computer, a whole different world.
No, that definitely makes sense, and then it's fair enough. So, well, we're already running towards the end of the podcast, and I did have one other question. And I said this is just one where it's a personal area of interest, and so I always I always love to talk about it. One of the other ones I'd heard, but I figured I'd ask you and confirm, is the other one that I've read is a lot of times you'll get the emails that you can tell are poorly written, and we're going to be scams. Now, is that because that what I've read, and I'll see if it's right, is that basically they're intentionally writing it very poorly to weed people out that are smart enough that don't want to waste their time. In other words, if they can see, hey, this is a scam, I'm not even going to respond, or I'm going to delete it. They're trying to intentionally weed those people out to get the most vulnerable, or the people that are willing to go for the scam, that even with all of the red flags, they continue to go forward. Is there truth to that? Does that happen? Or was that just something I read online that doesn't hold any water?
There's probably some truth to that, but originally it started because a lot of these were emanating out of like African nations where
Mm.
English was a secondary language. And so nation states and as others were, coming on board and doing that, I think as they've matured, it may now be leaning more towards the, hey, let's get the smart ones who aren't going to bite anyway out of the way.
Mm.
Some percentage will be that, some percentage are just English isn't the first language, but phishing emails now can be so sophisticated, it's hard to tell that they're even phishing emails.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I said I'm paranoid about it a bit with the people that work with me. They're like, "Oh, I got this email from him." I'm like, "No, you didn't get it from me." Like, because they'll always put like they'll replace the nickname for the person with or what the actual email. So if you don't pay attention, it looks like it comes from your name, and it's only if you actually look at the email that you don't see it. So there's
Miller 1P Law would be the domain I would buy to
yep.
send out emails on your behalf. Yeah.
Now you've given all the hackers a secret that now they're gonna and I'm gonna come and get you now.
They
No, I
they
think that's
know it.
yeah, I don't think it's a big secret. And that's even fun. There's been big companies like you've had other ones that they'll use an I instead. But with that, I always love to wrap up each episode with one question. So we'll dive to that now, which is within your industry, what is the biggest myth and why is it wrong?
Yeah, we were talking about how the biggest myth is that one, you can be secure, cybersecurity. It's all about risk management, and two, about compliance. Like I said, HIPAA is the medical, PCI for credit cards. There's lots of governance compliance that you have to meet controls. And I was talking about how controls make you feel secure, but there's a two-factor authentication control. And I could have my wife come in and go, "You're you," and I use a password. That's two factors. It's not really two factors. It's not really an extra security step. So ticking a box for an insurance company and say, yes, I meet my two-factor authentication because my wife says I'm me and then I log in, it's one thing, but security is another. So it is really about looking at your risk management and taking steps in a real way to be
Mm.
secure, not in I can check a box and say I do that kind of way.
No, I think that's definitely a great myth to dispel. And if I'm on the opposite side, I hate two-factor authentication. It always drives me nuts because I always have to do a second step and it takes me longer than I want. But I think that I love dispelling that myth, and I think there's a lot of great takeaways there. Well, we've reached the end of the podcast and it's been a fun, and I appreciate you working with the technical difficulties, and I had to laugh at it's because I was trying to help on my cybersecurity. It's still good. It just makes me smile. With that, if people want to reach out to you, they're saying, "Hey, I'd love to pick your brain. I'd love to get a bit more of an ideas on how to approach cybersecurity." So they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee because they're a great ex-hacker. Maybe it's Kevin Mitnick that is trying to get a job with you. Maybe it's an investor, or maybe somebody just wants to be your next best friend. Any or all the above. What's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
No worries. We're at www.digitalbeachhead.com, and we're also on LinkedIn. So Digital Beachhead on LinkedIn. Either way is a great way to reach out and get in contact.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage everybody to reach out. It's definitely a valuable area and something to make sure you have covered with your business. And so a great resource. And with that, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been it's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you can help us by sharing all this expertise with all those startups and small business out there that could benefit from it, just go and click share, subscribe, leave us a review, and we'll make sure that everybody can find out about all these great areas of expertise. And with that, if you ever need help with your patents, your trademarks, or anything else with your startup or small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Well, thank you again, Michael, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Perfect. Thank you.